Hi, fifth graders. I'm joining you today for chapter 12 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. Remember, the kids, Harry Potter, Hermione, and the Weasleys just showed up at Hogwarts, and they are going to find out about something exciting that's occurring this school year. So let's find out what's going on. The Triwizard Tournament, chapter 12. Through the gates, flanked with statues of winged boars, and the sweeping drive, the carriages trundled, swaying dangerously in what was fast becoming a gale. Leaning against the window, Harry could see Hogwarts coming nearer, its many lighted windows blurred and shimmering behind the thick curtain of rain. Lightning flashed across the sky as their carriage came to a halt before the great oak front doors, which stood at the top of the flight of stone steps. People had occupied the carriages in front, were already hurrying up the stone steps into the castle. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville jumped down from their carriage and dashed up the steps too, looking up only when they were safely inside the cavernous torch-lit entrance hall with its magnificent marble staircase. "Blimey," said Ron, shaking his head and sending water everywhere. "If that keeps up, the lake is going to overflow. I'm soaked. Arg!" A large red water-filled balloon dropped from the ceiling onto Ron's head and exploded. Drenched and spluttering, Ron staggered sideways into Harry just as a second water bomb dropped, narrowly missing Hermione, and it burst at Harry's feet, sending a wave of cold air over his trainers into his socks. People all around them shrieked and started pushing together in an effort to get out of the line of fire. Harry looked up and saw floating 20 feet above them, Peeves, the poltergeist, a little man in a bell-covered hat and orange bow tie, his wide, malicious face contorted with concentration as he took aim again. "Peeves!" yelled an angry voice. "Peeves, come down here at once!" Professor McGonagall, deputy head mistress of the Gryffindor house, came dashing out of the great hall. She skidded on the wet floor and grabbed Hermione around the neck to stop herself from falling. "Ouch! Sorry, Miss Granger." "That's all right, Professor," Hermione gasped, massaging her throat. "Peeves, get down here now," she barked, straightening her pointed hat and glaring upwards through her square-rimmed spectacles. "Not doing nothing," cackled Peeves, lobbing a water bomb at several fifth-years who screamed and dived into the great hall. "Already wet, aren't they? Little squirts. Whee!" He aimed another bomb at a group of second-years who had just arrived. "I shall call the headmaster," shouted Professor McGonagall. "I'm warning you, Peeves." Peeves stuck out his tongue, threw the last of the water bombs into the air, and zoomed up off the marble staircase, cackling insanely. "Well, move along then," said Professor McGonagall sharply to the bedraggled crowd. "Into the great hall. Come on." Harry, Ron, and Hermione slipped and slid across the entrance hall and through the double doors on the right, Ron muttering furiously under his breath as he pushed his sopping hair off his face. The great hall looked its usual splendid self, decorated for the start of term feast. Golden plates and goblets gleamed by the light of hundreds and hundreds of candles. Floating over the tables in midair, the long four-house tables were packed with chattering students at the top of the hall. At the top of the hall, the staff sat on one side of the fifth table facing the pupils. It was much warmer in here. Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked past the Slytherins, the Ravenclaws, and the Hufflepuffs, and sat down with the rest of the Gryffindors at the far side of the hall, next to nearly headless Nick, the Gryffindor ghost. Pearly white and semi-transparent, Nick was dressed tonight in his usual doublet with a particularly large ruff, which served the dual purpose of looking extra festive and ensuring that his head didn't wobble too much on his partially severed head. "Good evening," he said, beaming at them. "Says who?" said Harry, taking off his trainers and emptying the water out of them. "Hope they hurry up with the sorting. I'm starving." The sorting of the new students into houses took place at the start of every school year, but an unlucky combination of circumstances, Harry hadn't been present at one since his own. He was quite looking forward to it. And just then, a highly excited, breathless voice called down the table, "Hiya, Harry!" It was Colin Creevey, a third year, whom Harry was something of a hero. "Hi, Colin," said Harry wearily. "Harry, guess what? Guess what, Harry? My brother's starting! My brother Dennis!" Good. He's really excited," said Colin, practically bouncing up and down in his seat. "I just hope he's in Gryffindor. Keep your fingers crossed, eh, Harry?" Yeah, all right," said Harry. He turned back to Hermione, Ron, and nearly headless Nick. "Brothers and sisters usually go in the same houses, don't they?" he said. He was judging by the Weasleys, all 7 of whom had been put in Gryffindor. "Oh, no, not necessarily," said Hermione. "Pavarti Patil's twin is in Ravenclaw, and they're identical. You'd think they'd be together, wouldn't you?" Harry looked up at the staff table. There seemed to be rather more empty seats than usual. Hagrid, of course, was still fighting his way across the lake with the first years. Professor McGonagall was presumably supervising drying of the entrance hall, but there was another empty chair too, and he couldn't think who else was missing. "Where's the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher?" said Hermione, who was also looking up at the teachers. They had never yet had a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher who lasted more than 3 terms. Harry's favorite by far had been Professor Lupin, who had resigned last year. He looked up and down the staff table. There was definitely no new face there. "Maybe they couldn't get anyone," said Hermione, looking anxious. Harry scanned the table more carefully. Tiny little Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher, was sitting on a large pile of cushions beside Professor Sprout, the herbology teacher, whose hat was askew over her flyaway gray hair. She was talking to Professor Sinistra of the astronomy department. On Professor Sinistra's other side was the sallow, hook-faced, greasy-haired potions master, Snape, Harry's least favorite person at Hogwarts. Harry's loathing of Snape was matched only by Snape's hatred of him, a hatred which had, if possible, intensified last year, when Harry had helped Sirius escape right under Snape's overlarge nose. Snape and Sirius had been enemies since their school days. On Snape's other side was an empty seat which Harry guessed was Professor McGonagall's. Next to it and in the very center of the table sat Dumbledore, the headmaster, his sweeping silver hair and beard shining in the candlelight, his magnificent deep green robes embroidered with many stars and moons. The tips of Dumbledore's long, thin fingers were together, and resting, his chin upon them, staring up at the ceiling through his half-moon spectacles, as though lost in thought. Harry glanced up at the ceiling, too. It was enchanted to look like the sky outside, and had never seen it look this stormy. Black and purple clouds were swirling across it as another thunderclap sounded outside. A fork of lightning flashed across it. "Oh, hurry up," Ron moaned beside Harry. "I could eat a hippogriff." The words were no sooner out of his mouth than the doors of the great hall opened, and silence fell. Professor McGonagall was leading a long line of first years up to the top of the hall. If Harry, Ron, and Hermione were wet, it was nothing to how these first years looked. They appeared to have swum across the lake rather than sailing. All of them were shivering with a combination of cold nerves as they filed up along the staff table, coming to a halt in a line facing the rest of the school. All of them, the smallest of the lot, a boy with mousy brown hair, who was wrapped in what Harry recognized as Hagrid's moleskin overcoat. The coat was so big for him that it looked as though he was draped in a furry black marquet. His small face protruded from over the collar, looking almost painfully excited. When he had lined up with his terrified-looking peers, he caught Colin Creevy's eye, gave a double thumbs up, and mouthed, "I fell in the lake." He looked positively delighted by it. Professor McGonagall now placed a 3-legged stool on the ground before the first years, and on top of it, an extremely old, dirty, patched wizard's hat. The first years stared at it, and so did everyone else. For a moment there was silence. Then a tear near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat broke into song. "1,000 years or more ago, when I was newly sown, there lived 4 wizards of renown, whose names are still unknown. Bold Gryffindor from wild moor, fair Ravenclaw from glen, sweet Hufflepuff from Ballybrods, shrewd Slytherin from fen. They shared a wish A hope, a dream, they hatched a daring plan to educate young sorcerers. Thus Hogwarts School began. Now each of these 4 founders formed their own house for each, did value different virtues in ones they had to teach. By Gryffindor the bravest were prized far beyond the rest, for Ravenclaw the cleverest would always be the best, for Hufflepuff hard workers were most worthy of admission, and power-hungry Slytherin loved those of great ambition. While still alive, they did divide their favorites from the throng. Yet how to pick the worthy ones when they were dead and gone? 'Twas Gryffindor who found the way. He whipped me off his head. The founders put some brains in me so I could choose instead. Now slip me snug above your ears. I've never yet been wrong. I'll have a look inside your mind and tell you where you belong. The great hall rang with applause as the Sorting Hat finished. That's not the song he sang when he sorted us, said Harry, clapping along with everyone else. Sings a different one every year. It's got to be pretty boring, that life, hasn't it? Being a hat. I suppose it spends all year making the next one. Professor McGonagall was now unrolling a large scroll of parchment. When I call out your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool, she said to the first years. When the hat announces your house, you will go and sit at the appropriate table. Ackerley Stewart. A boy walked forward, visibly trembling from head to foot, picked up the sorting hat, put it on, and sat on the stool. Ravenclaw! Shouted the hat. Stuart Ackerley took off the hat and hurried into a seat at the Ravenclaw table, where everyone was applauding him. Harry caught a glimpse of Cho, the Ravenclaw seeker, cheering Stuart Ackerley as he sat down. For a fleeting second, Harry had a strange desire to join the Ravenclaw table too. Baddock Malcolm! Slytherin! The table on the other side of the hall erupted with cheers. Harry could see Malfoy clapping as Baddock joined the Slytherins. Harry wondered whether Baddock knew that the Slytherin house turned out more dark witches and wizards than any other. Fred and George hissed Malcolm Baddock as he sat down. Branstone Eleanor, Hufflepuff! Caldwell Owen, Hufflepuff! Creevy Dennis! Tiny Creevy Dennis Creevy, tripping over Hagrid's moleskin just as Hagrid himself sidled into the hall through a door behind the teacher's table, about twice as tall as a normal man, and at least 3 times as broad. Hagrid, with his long, wild, tangled black hair and beard, looked slightly alarming. A misleading impression, for Harry, Ron, and Hermione knew Hagrid to possess a very kind nature. He winked at them as he sat down at the end of the staff table and watched Dennis Creevy put on the sorting hat. The rip at the brim opened wide. Gryffindor! The hat shouted. Hagrid clapped along with the Gryffindors as Dennis Creevy, beaming wildly, took off the hat, placed it on the stool, and hurried over to join his brother. Colin, I fell in, he said shrilly, throwing himself into an empty seat. It was brilliant, and something in the water grabbed me and pushed me back into the boat. Cool, said Colin just as excitedly. It was probably the giant squid, Dennis. Wow, said Dennis, as though nobody in their wildest dreams could have hoped for more than being thrown into a storm-tossed, fathoms-deep lake. Dennis, see that boy down there? The one with the black hair and the glasses? See him? Know who he is, Dennis? Harry looked away, staring very hard at the sorting hat, now sorting Emma Dobbs. The sorting continued, boys and girls with varying degrees of fright on their faces, moving one by one to the 3-legged stool, the line dwindling slowly as Professor McGonagall passed the L's. Oh, hurry up, Ron moaned, massaging his stomach. Now, Ron, the sorting's much more important than food, said Nearly Headless Nick, as madly Laura became Hufflepuff. Course it is, if you're dead, Ron snapped. I do hope this year's batch of Gryffindors are up to scratch, said Nearly Headless Nick, applauding as McDonald Natalie joined the Gryffindor table. We don't want to break our winning streak, do we? Gryffindor had won the Inter-House Championship for 3 years in a row. Pritchard Graham, Slytherin, Quirk Orla, Ravenclaw, and finally, with Whitby Kevin, Hufflepuff, the sorting ended. Professor McGonagall picked up the hat and the stool and carried them away. About time, said Ron, seizing his knife and fork, looking expectantly at his gold plate. Professor Dumbledore's got to his feet. He was smiling around the students, his arms open wide in welcome. I have only 2 words for you, he said. his deep voice echoing around the hall. "Tuck in." "Here, here!" said Harry and Ron loudly, as the empty dishes filled magically before their eyes. Nearly headless Nick watched mournfully as Harry, Ron, and Hermione loaded their plates. "Ah, that's better," said Ron with his mouth full of mashed potato. "You're lucky there's a feast at all tonight, you know," said Nearly Headless Nick. "There was trouble in the kitchens earlier." "Why? What happened?" said Harry, through a sizable chunk of steak. "Peeves, of course," said Nearly Headless Nick, shaking his head with wobbled dangerously. He pulled up his little ruff a little bit higher in his neck. "The usual argument, you know. He wanted to attend the feast. Well, it's quite out of the question. You know what he's like. Utterly uncivilized. Can't see a plate of food without throwing it. We held a ghost council. The Fat Friar was all for giving him the chance, but mostly, in my opinion, the Bloody Baron put his foot down. The Bloody Baron was the Slytherin ghost, a gaunt and silent specter covered in silver bloodstains. He was the only person at Hogwarts who could really actually control Peeves." "Yeah, we thought Peeves seemed hacked off about something," said Ron darkly. "So what did he do in the kitchens?" "Oh, the usual," said Nearly Headless Nick, shrugging. "Wreaked havoc and mayhem. Pots and pans everywhere, place swimming in soup, terrified the house elves out of their wits." Clang! Hermione had knocked over her golden goblet. Pumpkin juice spread steadily over the tablecloth, staining several feet of white linen orange, but she paid no attention. "There are house elves here?" she said, staring horror-struck at Nearly Headless Nick. "Here at Hogwarts?" "Certainly," said Nearly Headless Nick, looking surprised at her reaction. "The largest number in any dwelling in Britain, I believe. Over 100. "I've never seen one," said Hermione. "Well, they hardly ever leave the kitchen by day, do they?" said Nearly Headless Nick. "They come out at night to do a bit of cleaning. See to the fires and so on. I mean, you're not supposed to see them, are you? That's the mark of a good house elf, isn't it? You don't know it's there?" Hermione stared at him. "But they get paid," she said. "They get holidays, don't they? And sick leave, and pensions, and everything?" Nearly Headless Nick chortled so much that his ruff slipped and his head flopped off, dangling an inch or so off the ghostly skin and muscle that still attached to his neck. "Sick leave and pensions?" he said, pushing his head back onto his shoulder and securing it once more with his ruff. "House elves don't want sick leave and pensions." Hermione looked down at her hardly touched plate of food, then put her knife and fork down upon it and pushed it away from her. "Come on, Hermione," said Ron, accidentally spraying Harry with bits of his Yorkshire pudding. "Oops, sorry." He swallowed. You won't get them sick leave by starving yourself." "Slave labor," said Hermione, breathing hard through her nose. "That's what made this dinner. Slave labor." And she refused to eat another bite. The rain was drumming heartily against the high, dark windows. Another clap of thunder shook the windows and stormy ceiling. It flashed, illuminating the gold plates as the remains of the first course vanished and were replaced instantly with puddings. "Treacle tart, Hermione," said Ron deliberately, wafting its smell towards her. "Spotted! Look! Chocolate gâteau!" But Hermione gave him a look so reminiscent of Professor McGonagall that he gave up. When the puddings, too, had been demolished and the last of the crumbs had faded off of the plates, leaving them sparkling clean, Albus Dumbledore got to his feet again. The buzz of chatter filling the hall ceased almost at once, so the howling wind and rain could be heard. "So," Dumbledore said, smiling around at them all, "now that we've all fed and been watered—" "Hm," said Hermione. "I must once more ask for your attention, while I give you a few notices. Mr. Filch, the caretaker, has asked me to tell you that the list of objects forbidden inside the castle has this year been extended to include screaming yo-yos, fanged frisbees, ever-bashing boomerangs. The full list comprises some 437 items, I believe, and can be viewed in Mr. Filch's office, if anyone would like to check it." The corners of Dumbledore's mouth twitched. He continued. "As ever, I would like to remind you that the forest in the grounds is out of bounds to students, as is the village of Hogsmeade to all below the 3rd year. It is also my painful duty to inform you that the Inter-House Quidditch Cup will not take place this year." "What?" Harry gasped. He looked around at Fred and George, his fellow members of the Quidditch team. They were mouthing soundlessly at Dumbledore, apparently too appalled to speak. Dumbledore continued, "This is due to an event that will be starting in October and continuing throughout the school year, taking up much of the teachers' time and energy, but I am sure you will all enjoy it immensely. I have the great pleasure of announcing that this year at Hogwarts—" But at that moment there was a deafening rumble of thunder, and the doors of the great hall banged open. Okay, we're going to stop right there. That was 20 minutes. We'll find out how Chapter 12 ends tomorrow. I want you guys to make your predictions. Why did the door just bang open? Why did the thunder just crack? Why is it all dramatic right now? Who do you think's at the door? I want you guys to make your predictions below. See you guys tomorrow.